Елена.
Так, включай пока.
Коллеги, мы начинаем запуск прямой трансляции. У нас
будет live broadcast. We'll have
поддержки
another
нам
20 seconds of silence,
началась, и мы
and our colleagues from the tech support will give us a sign.
Коллеги, запускаем трансляцию.
So we start the broadcast.
Мы будем в эфире через 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Уважаемые коллеги, доброе
Dear
утро.
colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. We're very happy to welcome you, to see you here. I can see that the participants that have registered are joining us gradually. And despite this last summer week we're having,
сегодняшний выпуск своего рода финал.
Discussion we're having today is kind of completes our summer.
Каждый вторник мы с вами встречались и обсуждали
Series of discussions. We've been meeting every Tuesday, discussing various aspects of the activities that cultural institutions are performing in various regions. And today we're linking our discussion with the traineeship program, which is an important part of our work. And the British experience, the UK experience, has helped us a lot. We've been studying practices in terms of working with cultural resources and developing communities and regions. So today, the UK experience will be in the focus. First, I'll give the floor to Yelena Konovalova, the program director for the cultural department of the Timchenko Foundation.
Спасибо, друзья,
Thank you, Inna, dear friends.
добрые для всех,
I hope
независимо от того,
you're all feeling well,
страны вы находитесь.
regardless of the place you're in, and regardless of the weather. As Inna has mentioned it already, we are enjoying sunny weather today. Today we are having our old friends and partners.
Провели ряд мероприятий и планировали проводить еще, но известные обстоятельства вынудили нас встать на паузу, но мы, тем не менее, надеемся.
You know, circumstances we all know about have forced us to make a pause, but I'm very happy to greet Olga Karpova and Jennifer. I do hope we meet in flesh as well. And I'm also very happy to welcome the colleagues that Jennifer brought to this discussion. And today we're having our international traineeship, international discussion. And I find it a very important discussion, which is, as has been mentioned, the finale of our summer discussions and meetings and workshops. It is very important for us to analyze, to see, to assess our program, to see what we have achieved, and maybe think of what we should work on. I'm sure we'll hear about that from Inna, but today I'd like our discussion, our talk, to be, you know, kind of an international one. And we know that our participants have, some of you have traveled.
Я знаю, что Дженнифер также приезжала.
And I know that Jennifer also visited us with the results, with the outcomes of the training programs. And I'm sure we have a lot of things to remember. But it is very important for us to discuss and to talk about how we see ourselves in these new circumstances, in this new situation. And we're not only talking about some specific towns or communities in Russia or in the UK. Uh, we need to understand how we, living on this earth, how do we feel, whether we are needed, how do we understand where we can be of most help, and how can we join our efforts and make a breakthrough effort to achieve a new level of development. I won't keep you long. I know that we have a very exciting program today. Thank you, Yelena. I just want to set up some house rules and to tell the participants what options they have for a discussion. Dear colleagues, we're now going live. We have an opportunity to receive your questions in the chat room.
В Фейсбуке, а также
And you can also write in our Facebook, on our Facebook page, and we also have a YouTube broadcast. My colleague, Maria Krupnik, who is an analytical director of the program, she'll help us manage all these channels and register the questions. And we'll have a chance between presentations and in the end to discuss
волнуют и
all
те вопросы, которые вы задавали.
the issues that you find important. I'm not going to keep you long as well. One more thing. Our colleagues, I'm kindly asking you to mute yourselves, those who are not speaking. When we're going to discuss it, you can use the reactions panel and raise your hand, and moderators will see that you're willing to speak or you're willing to ask or maybe comment. So I'm happy to give the
Нашим
floor
модераторам, и мы
to
действительно
our
с
moderators.
воодушевлением в 2017 году
And
под
in
руководством
2017, under
Хинвес
Karpova and Jennifer Hinves, we participated
и надо сказать, что
in
сбор,
training course in Newcastle
который
and in the vicinities.
ну, созвучен теме
And after
стажировки
this course, this workshop,
про
uh,
организации как Центра социокультурного развития территорий,
since it was about cultural organizations and development of communities. And the materials we have come up with are available on our website. And Olga Karpova
я
was
представляю
the
же
head of the program at that time. And today Olga heads the department,
я думаю, что скажет
the
еще
social development of the Moscow School of Social Sciences. She will also share her reflections on the experience we have got,
Дженнифер
we have
Хинвес,
received then,
второй наш
and
модератор.
how it reflects today. Jennifer Hinves is our second moderator. We're very grateful to Jennifer that you have brought together very interesting speakers. Jennifer is a cultural producer, and she also teaches at the School of Social Sciences as a visiting professor. And she's a
Слово. Мы
producer
вас
of this project. Well, colleagues, you have the floor. And we'll be happy to attend. Thank you very much.
Мне начать, а потом
Jennifer, if you allow, I will begin and I will give you the floor, if you don't mind. Our previous training course was dedicated to the centers of cultural development for various territories. But the main focus of our work and the cases we studies was trying to understand what are the sustainability models for cultural organizations, especially for the organizations that
гораздо
work in
более
smaller areas and that have limited resources and opportunities compared to the organizations that are working in larger cities. And I remember how many participants of this training course in the very beginning, had doubts whether this experience could be relevant in our Russian realia, because they claimed we had a very different cultural and economical and political environment, and they were doubtful whether this experience could be used and applied in the Russian environment. But by the end of the course, there were no doubts left. And discussing what sustainability is and what are the secrets of sustainability are, our participants started to understand that the secret is diversification of the resources, of the sources, managing these resources in the changing environment. For me, one of the key answers was the ability to work with the local community, with very different people, with very different communities. This is something we're starting to discuss, to see as mechanisms that allow us to attract larger audiences. This was a discovery for for the majority of the participants, and the feedback only proves that this was really the most striking experience. Today, within this pandemic situation, we're facing a slightly different situation. We remember comparing the funds and finding British funds much bigger than Russian funds. And we were complaining that our civil society is not yet developed enough to become the real society. Today, on the contrary, this pandemic situation has become an interesting experience for us. Our long-term existence within this budget funding and this budget funding that we used to find as limitation for our development, today has become kind of insurance for us, for our organizations. Jennifer will talk about it, I'm sure. In the UK, cultural practices are now facing real challenges because they're less secured by the state support compared to the Russian cultural organizations. And this phenomenon is now widely discussed. So socially, who is socially insured, socially protected today? We're talking about the people who are working for the state, in a sense. And I think it is one of the cases we should deliberate upon, discussing British experience as well. Whether this inclusion and involvement activity has become less important, and whether state support is of paramount importance. Should we be working with local communities? What are the goals that we should put forward? These are the questions. And here I would give the floor to Jennifer. And I kindly ask all our colleagues when we discuss to think about this dilemma. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, and a very warm welcome to all from me. I'm Jennifer Hinvers, and I'm delighted to join you for this session where we share with you some of the examples of UK practice in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and hope that together we can all contribute.
Потом он опять куда-то уходил. То есть Тимир лежит, дождь и капает, Миша где-то гуляет. Я выхожу, смотрю, он идет.
Ну, ты ему сказал об этом?
Оль, я вчера на Гену ругался, я не хочу теперь еще на Мишу ругаться.
Коллеги, Ольга Грачева, пожалуйста, отключите ваш микрофон. Спасибо. Дженнифер, извините.
Sorry, Jennifer, someone hasn't muted themselves.
I'll carry on.
Yeah, sure.
I'm delighted to join you for this session where we share with you some examples of UK practice in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and hope that together we can all contribute to a better understanding of the challenges and opportunities that this ongoing situation presents to the cultural sector. Each speaker will give a short presentation describing their situations and experiences of this critical time. You'll hear from Susie Troop, the founder and director of the Hexham Book Festival. Hexham is a small market town in rural Northumberland. You'll hear from Matthew Jarrett, who's involved with cultural policy in the UK and further afield in China. But today he'll talk about the setting up of the Cheeseburn Sculpture Park in rural Northumberland. And you'll hear from Susie O'Hara, who's a freelance curator, cultural producer, and an academic researching interdisciplinary collaboration and arts-led innovation. But before that, a brief overview of the context in which small-scale rural cultural organizations and practitioners are attempting to respond to the ongoing COVID-19 situation in the UK. In March this year, the UK government required all businesses, with very few exceptions, to close down. Those workers who could were told to work from home. The closures included all public performance spaces. The government then agreed to offer financial assistance for the loss of business resulting from the closures, in an attempt to minimize the job losses and the redundancies that are likely to follow. This financial support was time limited, but it did provide a vital buffer for many economic sectors. Some workers carried on working from home and continued to receive full pay from their employers. Some received initially 80%, now reduced to 60% of their salaries paid by the government. And current plans that this financial support will end in October this year. Although there have already been a number of large-scale redundancies, this was a huge help for many, at least in the short term. But others fell through this support net altogether. And despite the cultural economy being the second largest after finance in the UK, this was one sector which only benefited marginally from these support measures. This is due to the complete shutdown of public performance spaces, as well as to the very high percentage of freelance and self-employed workers that make up the culture sector workforce, approximately 47%. So many of the culture sector freelance workers did not meet the criteria of eligibility for support through the government financial scheme. So ironically, organizations that had followed government encouragement over recent years to be less reliant on state support and develop earned incomes, which many had been very successful at doing through box office and ticket sales and retail income streams from entry charges, shops, cafes, and bars, they were the ones to suffer most from the total loss of income due to the enforced 3-month venue closures. Some are beginning to open now. For example, the British Museum in London opens next week. But the number of visitors are strictly limited by social distancing guidelines. And in the UK, a 2-meter distance must be allowed between people in such spaces. That severely limits the numbers allowed in at any one time. And visitors are also required to wear face masks. So just at a time when many of us are placing an even higher value on cultural activities, in this time of lockdown, some venues have already closed. Some, including the Theatre Royal in Newcastle, are looking unlikely to reopen. Such mainstream organisations are the obvious victims of these current difficulties, but there are many smaller and less visible practitioners and micro-creative businesses that are also struggling to survive. At a virtual conference last week of arts funders, the discussion constantly returned to the continual fluidity and volatility of the UK situation. The fact that outbreaks continue to be announced here for local communities, towns, or cities will bring further closure of public venues and stricter guidelines, possibly even a curfew such as Melbourne in Australia is recently experiencing. Arts funders, however, are working really well with the sector. They accept the fact that where funding has been awarded on the basis of a project or an organisation producing agreed outcomes, those outcomes cannot currently be delivered. So contracts are having to be reworked and rewritten. And this in itself is a challenging task. And no one yet knows with any degree of certainty what alternative timing will be possible. So we know that further difficulties lie ahead. But we also know that this is a creative, resilient, and innovative sector, and many have found or are finding ways to survive, adapt, and even to thrive. The examples you hear about now illustrate what is being experienced and achieved here in the northeast of England. One emergent theme, which Dr. Susie O'Hara will focus on, is what she terms the digital pivot, where organizations featuring marginal digital activities are refocusing to place digital technologies central to their core activities. The Yorkshire Festival of Story is an interesting example of this. A conventional venue-based festival has switched to being entirely online. Their funding has switched from entry charges to online donations, and early indications suggest they're exceeding previous festival incomes, as well as developing a wider global audience reach. Another small but very interesting example is the Tyne-and-Wear Cultural Freelancers. This is a network set up by a group of freelance workers just seeking to help each other. So a small group initially, and it's grown to a very large network that's all over the region, offering support, advice, assistance. Very, very interesting and effective. So the director of the National Theatre, Rufus Norris's rallying cry reminds us that the UK's world-beating creative industries are predicated on action, courage, and creativity. And just now, activity is survival. Thank you, and it's my pleasure to hand you over now to Susie Troop.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Jennifer, for that fantastic intro. I think you've saved me a few words as well. Just to inform you of where we are in a nutshell before I get on to my presentation. We, like Jennifer said, are an organisation that has thrived through seeking private patronage, support through sponsors, and very importantly, box office sales. Our festival, which is the backbone of our funding, really, because it constitutes 60% of our income over the year, had to be cancelled in March. The festival was all programmed. We'd spent 6 months preparing. We'd spent, of course, all the related fees and marketing costs. So we lost not only our income from the box office sales, but we lost our sponsorship, we lost all the money that we'd already spent. I thought I would just take you through a brief history of our organisation and where we are to explain our position in the Northeast. I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully, if the technology works. Here we go. So going forward, this is our history and context. We're based in the Queen's Hall, which is the image on the right of the screen here, which obviously has closed due to the pandemic and is still closed. Our programming has to start at the end of September, and we have no guarantee that the Queen's Hall will be open in time for us to hold our festival there. So we have got contingency plans, which I will go on to tell you about. Underneath on the right, you can see one of the venues of the Queen's Hall, which is the library, which has a capacity of 100. And in the Queen's Hall itself, there's a theatre seating 340. That's our main venue. We also have on the left the Abbey, which has its own venues we use, and below a Spiegel tent, which was planned to be a young people's festival launching this year in the grounds of the Abbey. So that's our position in our market town. We started in 2006 with a 2-day festival with only 15 authors, but an audience of 500. By 2019, we had grown to 10 days with 65 events, 70 authors giving talks and workshops and seminars, and an audience of 7,300, which is 77% of our capacity. Pretty good. So we ticked lots of boxes for self-funding. This year in our festival that we had to cancel, we programmed 78 authors over 69 events, a new young people's festival in the Spiegel tent, which fortunately we have paid for, so can come back next year, 45 authors and artists, and individual commissions for circus shows, writers' commissions, and such like. We encourage a lot of economic impact in the region. We boost the local economy. We support local businesses and bookshops and tourism. In 2017, we did a survey that showed that people spent a minimum of £15 above and beyond their festival tickets on the local economy. So quite a success story so far. Oops, sorry. Our other handle, if you like, throughout the year is that Northumberland County Council support our outreach programme, which is delivered in schools mostly and libraries and other community centres. So for this, we have separate funding. So 3,500 young people under the age of 18 joined in our workshops and creative writing activities and talks by high-profile authors who we take directly to their schools. 700 adults enjoyed creative writing workshops, book groups and author talks, which constitutes 30 days of employment for writers. We also run pop-up projects supported by funds like the Arts Council and in collaboration with other organisations. The most recent example is on the right here, Silence in the Library. We created and curated a soundproof listening pod in which people could sit quietly within sometimes noisy libraries now and listen to works, stories, poetry, books. We also, alongside this, ran an author tour with young people. You can see them on the left there, coming from schools to hear popular children's authors speak. And this travelled around the very large county of Northumberland. I saw Matthew has got a map of Northumberland. You will see what it's like. But it's the 6th largest county in the UK. So very, very distant and quite isolated rural villages sometimes. But a lot have libraries. So this was a good way of reaching young and old audiences. This project of work, we hope, will continue whatever happens to the festival, finance willing. So here we are, having cancelled the festival. After the immediate cancellation of the festival, we appealed to ticket holders to donate part of their ticket price, which many generously did, but obviously it couldn't touch our box office income. We took our children's authors who had been booked to come to the Spiegel tent online and appealed to local celebrities, film stars, actors, high-profile writers, and they all read stories which could be accessed free online. And we joined up with the local charities so that if people wanted to, they could donate money to help young people who have been particularly isolated through the COVID pandemic. Throughout the summer, we've continued to run our online writing workshops, where young people can join in online and be set creative writing, playwriting and poetry. That is ongoing at the moment and actually has been extraordinarily successful in reaching new young audiences. And we hope when we have a venue, we will bring them in to real life book group and writing groups. We also have moved our online book group to a monthly meeting on Zoom. So going forward, where are we now? Well, financially, it's pretty desperate. Because, as I said, the loss of our income, not only from the book festival, but all the money that we'd spent in preparing for a book festival that didn't happen. We, in reality, face closure in 12 months' time as an organisation, and we can get some more financial support. We have applied to government funding package, which has recently been released, Culture Recovery Fund, through Arts Council England. And we are hopeful that if we do achieve that, we can go forward to next spring with our festival. Now, we recognise that a normal format of events are unlikely to be certain for us by the time that we are programming. We already have our Spiegel tent, which I talked about before, which has been paid for next year. So our plan will be that we will produce a series of limited events in the Spiegel tent, which can normally seat 300, but will be down to 100. The picture on your right, you will see, is showing very recently our colleagues delivered a film outside the Abbey, which is where our Spiegel tent will be. So we will program live screened events from outside of the Spiegel tent as well into the Abbey grounds to covered seating. Hopefully the weather won't be like today, as it is here when it's pouring with rain. And we will then have limited seating with social distancing within the Spiegel tent and live screening to distance seating outside. And we can also screen this to smaller venues across the counties at the simultaneous time. We feel that this is a way forward to maximise audience and ensure box office income going forward. We recognise that the online format will be quite tired for book festivals by next spring. So we recognise the necessity to have some live engagement. We think this is vital for our particular audiences in Northumberland. It's a destination festival. People want to come to Hexham, they want to come to the surrounding area, they want to see the Abbey. It's a visitor experience, and we want to be able to deliver that in some way next spring. The last slide you'll see is actually fantastic because it shows very clearly where we are. The area with the screen is where we will have our tent, and then the area in the cloister garden with the circular lawn below will be where we have our screened participation. We are hopeful that this will happen. If we don't get financial support, we will have contingencies set up where we will deliver our young people's work, but we will have to look at the structure of our organisation. I'm really looking forward to hearing what the rest of the people in the forum have to say. And thank you so much for listening to me. I will leave you with that picture. I don't know if I go back to me now or... Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Susie. That was fantastic. Really interesting. And really interesting to hear the shift that you're making from obviously a venue-based or place-based event to one that's a blend, or currently virtually, but to eventually be a blend of place and virtual. So I think that's a very interesting situation that I think probably many people will be aiming toward. And it's great you introduced that notion of the destination festival and the visitor experience. That's a really important thing we want to keep hold of, I think. So I don't know, Inna, if any participants have any questions for Susie?
Можно я пока задам вопрос?
Can I ask a question to clarify? Susie, well, how do you yourself, I know you probably weren't counting, or how many people, what was the audience that participated in your activities during the pandemics? I mean, digital activities, have you?
Oh, digitally. We had one digital event which was audience-based, which was for book groups. And we had a participation which was just from people who had read the book for the author. And I think we had a total of 40 people logged in to watch that. The creative writing classes that we have been running, we have reached a maximum of 30 young people in those 3 different courses over the course of 3 months. And I'm afraid I don't have the analytics from this story space, which was the sharing of stories but I understand that it was widely viewed. Sorry, I don't have those figures with me.
Okay, thank you for that, Susie. Are there any other questions for Susie?
У нас есть
We have one question from Елена Veselkova, sorry. But I think it all our UK speakers. She wanted to clarify about state funding in terms of working with local communities. Well, this lockdown and the ban on public events makes one think that it is more beneficial for the state to support people sitting at home rather than support activities. Is it true for the UK situation as well?
I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer that. I know that the funding that we receive for working across the county is in place, but because a lot of it is based around schools, and the schools have not been at school for the last 5 months, we haven't been able to deliver those. So we are rolling everything on to the autumn and the spring when we will be delivering those. So we'll have a very intense period during that time. So I'm afraid I can't answer for other organizations on that front. Sorry.
But I think what you say, Susie, is probably very true of so many organizations, because they've all had to be closed. Government hasn't been able to support public activities because there haven't been any. They're only just beginning to open now. So it's now beginning, how can we support as it emerges? But we do know, or we're told we need to know, that further outbreaks will occur and there will be further closures, further restrictions. So it still is a really volatile time in the UK with regard to public performance. And that's why I think theatres and festivals and music venues have been so hard hit by this situation. So, Ina, I think if there are I think there's a question for Susie.
Yeah, I can't read the bottom of it. Online opportunity. Can somebody tell me what that says? Sorry.
I'm highly interested about your point of view regarding the online opportunities of, let's say, visiting experience.
The question from
I'm not quite sure what the question is there.
I'm highly interested about
your question is
regarding the online opportunities of, let's say, visiting experience. It might be greatly supported by the governmental measures just as well, or by the efforts under the Great Nation branding campaign.
Is there a question though? I'm sorry.
Maybe your opinion whether the visiting experience can be achieved online.
Interesting. Yes, I think this is a really interesting question. I have obviously been watching a lot of the book festivals, which is my milieu, delivering online. And I think the challenge for a book festival in an online format is that here in the UK, we have very, very good access already to a lot of arts on our radios, on our television. And the fact that you have to log into a screen at a particular time is a problem for a lot of individuals. The experience of going out and meeting friends and going to events is a vital part of it. And I think that a lot of people have not logged in at particular times for an online festival. However, if, as our Edinburgh Festival are doing, you can go in at any time and watch an event, then I think that works fantastically well. I recently watched a beautifully filmed interview between Hilary Mantel and a journalist, and I think that works very well. But I also think that, as I said before, this has been something people have loved accessing when we have all been restricted in our lives, but I think that will wear out as an experience. And going forward, this time next year, we will all be desperate to have real life experiences. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Good answer to me, I think. So I think thank you very much to Susie Troop from the Hexham Book Festival, and it's now a pleasure to hand over to our second speaker, who is Matthew Jarrett.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll just sort my screen out. Okay. Can I ask if you can see that okay?
Yes.
Super. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about a Cheeseburn sculpture, which is a sculpture park that we established in 2014 in Northumberland. And there is, sorry. And I thought I'd include this map just so that people can kind of locate the sort of Northumberland in relation to Edinburgh, to the top of the screen there in Scotland, and Newcastle. So we're the little blue arrow. And I have to say, I didn't intend to start Cheeseburn Sculpture, but I left the Arts Council, which is the government sort of arts funding body, about 7 or 8 years ago. And I was introduced to a lady who owns Cheeseburn, which is a private house and working farm in Northumberland. And I should also say that Northumberland has a bit of a reputation for, I suppose, quite distinctive and quite quirky visual arts places.
We can't see the presentation, unfortunately. We can't see the slides. Just maybe you should check what's going on.
Oh, okay.
Matthew, I'm terribly sorry, but we don't see the picture.
Let me try and
share your screen.
It dropped out again. There. Maybe I'll try again. Sorry.
Yeah, we can see that you've started, but somehow it's not showing. So
yeah, it's going very slowly.
Oh.
Техническая поддержка наша советует вам запустить.
Our tech people suggest you choose display, please.
I'm trying to share the screen at the moment, and it's going very slowly.
If you could please try again. Matthew, there might be a problem. Maybe you should exit and try it again. Matthew, are you with us? I have a feeling that Matthew is not online.
Have we lost you, Matthew?
Да, похоже, мы потеряли Мэтью.
Yeah, it looks like he's, yeah. We'll try to relaunch it with him. While we're doing this, I can see in the chat there's a talk about, and there are questions from the participants. And there is a discussion going on. Maria, can you pick up with the questions that we already have for us to be able to continue our discussion while we're solving this problem with Matthew? There was a question from Timofey Bincharov about whether our British experts are able to give a forecast. How long will it take the cultural sphere to, come back to its senses after the lockdown?
If only we could answer that. That is the million-dollar question. We don't know. Sorry.
I can answer one of the questions.
Да, задавала его Наталья Бенчарова.
Наталья Бенчарова, who asked the question, she was among the trainees.
I can answer one of the questions from earlier now, because my colleague has just messaged me to say 33,000 people watched our online events. So an earlier question answered.
Good, great. Good number 2.
Yeah.
Should we carry on waiting for Matthew, or should we perhaps move to Susie O'Hara in a...
Jennifer, я предлагаю передать
Yeah, I suggest we give the floor to Susie, and because we were not able to reach Matthew.
Okay. In that case, a pleasure to introduce Susie O'Hara.
Hello, thank you so much. Very happy to jump in while Matthew sorts.
Здравствуйте, я очень рада сейчас перед вами выступить.
I'll just share my screen here.
Сейчас я включу презентацию.
Share. And I will go into my slideshow.
Итак.
Okay, well, first and foremost, I'd just like to thank our host.
Прежде всего, я хочу поблагодарить организаторов, Ольгу, Елену, Инну. Большое спасибо за то, что устроили это замечательное мероприятие.
So one of the things that I'm hearing is the translation.
К сожалению, мне немного слышно эхо перевода.
That might be difficult.
Могут быть с этим трудности.
Stop and share my screen, and I need to make sure that I'm on the English. Yes, I am. Okay, I shall do this again. Okay, so I've entitled my talk "Pivot, Reimagine and Respond." What I'd like to do is curating through COVID-19. My name is Susie O'Hara. I'm a freelance curator and a research fellow and academic based in the University of Sunderland. The 3 words pivot, reimagine and respond relate to 3 different projects that I'm going to have a quick run through during my presentation. The first being a project entitled Little Inventors, who have done 2 different activities that I think might be interesting to our audience here. The first is based on a live event, Little Inventors Pioneers, that had to pivot from a physical to a digital engagement, similar to Susie Troop and her book festival. The second was devised, funded by the Emergency Fund for Arts Council of England, to create a digital specific project to be delivered during the lockdown and COVID pandemic period. The second project I want to talk about, excuse me, is the Human Cell Atlas Public Engagement Project that I'm currently curating. This project had, like Jennifer suggested, a slippage due to lockdown at the beginning of the project. And I want to talk about how we've responded and started to reimagine what the wider project will be moving forward. And the final project that I wanted to talk about was based on a book that I co-edited with a colleague entitled Art Hack Practice: Critical Intersections with Art and Innovation in the Maker Movement. And we use this opportunity of launching our book to respond and bring a global community of artists and practitioners together, similar to this program, to respond to the particular challenges that we as a cultural community were facing during the pandemic period. So to kick off with Little Inventors is an organization that's approximately 5 years old now. And fundamentally what we do as a creative organization is fuse the limitless imaginations of children with the practical making skills of creatives and makers from across all disciplines and sectors to turn them into real objects for exhibition. The artist, inventor and designer Dominic Wilcox kicked the project off in Sunderland in the northeast of England and invited Sunderland-based children in schools, cultural venues, libraries, community venues to imagine invention ideas. We worked and did an open call for makers across different sectors and industries to help turn these ideas into a reality, into a real object. We then got a pop-up shop, an empty shop in the high street in the city centre, and converted it into a live exhibition for 2 weeks and turned it into an ideas lab where people could come in and see about 26 different objects that we had created in collaboration with children and makers. We exhibited over 600 invention ideas that have been generated through the project, and over 1,000 people, generally who don't go to exhibitions and cultural exhibitions, came through the doors during those 2 weeks. So that was our first initial project with the Little Inventors project. So 5 years on, we have an exhibition. We have an online website, littleinventors.org. We now host over 20,000, excuse me, invention ideas from across the world. We've been collaborating with partners across Canada, across Europe, in China, in various different locations, facilitating challenges that their young people can respond to and invent solutions to. One of our recent projects was as part of the Great Exhibition of the North back in 2018, and we hosted the Great 2030 Challenge, where we invited children across the north of England to think about what life would be like in 2030 and invent solutions to any problems they might foresee, what fun things they could be doing, things like what could they be wearing, how could they be transporting themselves in various different locations. You see here, Andrew, age 9, invented the pulsar cast, inspired by his granny, who had fallen and broken her wrist, and he was interested in finding a solution to stopping muscle wastage while she was recovering with the cast on her arm. He worked then with staff in the Sunderland Royal Hospital to turn this into a real prototype for the final exhibition. Adriana, who was age 10, invented a fantastic smarter house, which afforded lots of really interesting environmentally friendly ways to use energy, made it completely accessible to disabled participants in the house. And she was selected to have her invention made by an award-winning architectural firm based in Newcastle, Faulkner Brown Architecture. So really briefly, some of the impact that we've had since 2016, as I said, we've worked with over 20,000 inventions have been created from children in over 35 countries across 6 continents. We've worked with a whole range of different really fantastic partners, including the Canadian Space Agency. We've presented the project to prime ministers, presidents and princesses. We've had 5 inventions by the children of Sunderland accessioned into a national collection at the V&A Museum in London. And it's been an incredible journey thus far. The latest project that I wanted to talk about is called Little Inventors Pioneers. It's an R&D project that's been funded by Arts Council and Tees Valley Combined Authority in the region. And fundamentally for Little Inventors, it was an experimental research and development project exploring new models of creative engagement that helped deepen our impact and longer term engagement with our participants, our partners and our audiences, and engage children aged 8 to 12 to create inventions that generate, save or help use energy better. So this project had all of its funding in place. It kicked off last year, and the final live exhibition, which would be a physical exhibition, was due to happen in June this year. We went through our usual processes, devising an exhibition website for the process, for the challenge. We delivered it digitally in the way that we do via schools, teachers offering free downloadable resource packs for teachers and parents to work with their children to come up and draw down their invention ideas. We had over 1,000 invention ideas submitted, and you can see all of these things on our website, littleinventors.org. However, the live exhibition obviously couldn't go ahead. So for the first time, Little Inventors had to pivot, I suppose, to use this word digital pivot, to the online space in a similar way to Hexham Abbey, and think about how to maximize digital assets to create an experience that would be akin to, or if not better than, a physical exhibition. So here are some, you can see the the website address is there for people to check this out later on. It's very interactive. It showcases all of the inventions that have been generated by makers. We did a particular focus, obviously, on creating more digital assets as opposed to physical, but there are some physical objects in there too. And we played around with creating video content and, you know, thinking about display, thinking about how people navigate exhibition space in the live, and how to think about it then in an online distributed way. The second project that the Little Inventors were successful in receiving emergency funding from Arts Council England for was the Maker Challenges. The opportunity for the Maker Challenges was to use the funding that was afforded to us to commission an engaging project across our networks of artists, creatives, experts, and cultural venues to provide inspiring online activities, specifically online, for children and families. This was born out of a variety of different initiatives that we'd started during the lockdown period, which we found to be really successful, particularly our daily challenge, which received a huge amount of hits on Twitter and other social networks that we were utilizing to push the message out. So Little Inventors has used the funding to commission 10 creative makers to produce a set of creative challenges delivered through videos, activity sheets, how-to guides, instructions for teachers and parents. And each creative has made a package of content for families to work through, to develop their own practical skills, express their ideas, build creative confidence, and learn about the creative's own work. So one challenge at the moment is being released each week over a 3-month period. I just thought that might be an interesting. And here's an example of a post on Facebook that's promoting both the maker, their particular practice, and they're facilitating the delivery of a package of activity for people to download for free from our website. So just a few reflections on pivoting for Little Inventors. Initially, we were building on existing online activity. So using our assets, such as our website, our social media, etc., to think creatively about how we can maximize the space that we've got available to us and that we already established. We focused on retaining our existing audience before thinking about extending our reach to new audiences and making sure that we were getting the experience that we were providing right. We wanted to be specific about how we were using these alternative modes of media to meet our aims. And I think that's a really important thing for other people to do when they're thinking about new media-based formats for their work. We wanted to make sure that we were entirely consistent with the quality of our offer. So making sure that whatever we did online, we saw as a plan A and not a plan B. This was not about kind of pivoting in terms of making kind of the best of a bad situation. This was about really thinking about how we explore the digital space as a plan A experience for our audiences. The second project I wanted to talk about quickly was the Human Cell Atlas. The Human Cell Atlas is a pioneering multidisciplinary global research project that actually aims to map the function of each human cell in the human body, which amounts to about 37 trillion, paving the way for a new understanding and treatment of disease. The International Consortium of HCA researchers amounts to over 1,000 from over 50 countries, so it's an entirely international global consortium. The public engagement project that I'm leading is entitled One Cell at a Time, bringing together communities, patients, and researchers to build a human cell atlas. And it's funded by a research enrichment grant from the Wellcome Trust. As you can imagine, due to the pandemic, both projects, the science and the public engagement aspects, have been postponed. And this slippage of 6 months will take us to September, when we're hoping to kick off our live programme. The public engagement project aims to improve the value and trust that people place in research, with a consequent impact on the public's willingness to donate tissue for research and share their data to progress the scientific research. It will also help identify unmet areas of need that the Human Cell Atlas can tackle. It's a collaboration between 6 different institutions: the Wellcome Sanger Institute in Cambridge, the University of Cambridge, Newcastle University up here in the northeast of England, King's College in London, and the University of Oxford. So the public engagement project is driven by 2 questions that's leading the research. The first, what is it to be normal? The second is what influences people's... Oh, sorry. Is there something? The second is what influences people's value and trust involving tissue donation and open access data. We have a third strand, which is focusing on school children and exploring how to build a human. Excuse me. My curatorial aims for this programme is to broker new ways of thinking, new modes of seeing, and new contexts for doing between the artistic communities and the scientific communities through curatorship. The initial project was very much seen through as a very live face-to-face experience across a year's worth of activity. It was going to include collaborative artistic commissions, public workshops, live maker labs, a touring exhibition at community venues, a commissioned film, and then the Schools Challenge, which would be fundamentally delivered by live researchers going into schools. And then the pandemic hit. So we've had to essentially reimagine what our programme will look like, but also respond to the current context of the pandemic. So, in terms of our delivery, what we've had to do is bring forward our establishment of a digital infrastructure for the programme that we're going to be delivering. So on the Human Cell Atlas website, we ensured that we got our programme up onto that website as soon as possible to start getting some digital profile. We also decided to capitalise on some of the work that the Human Cell Atlas researchers were doing around the COVID pandemic. And what we worked with the University of Sunderland to create our first artistic and science collaboration, an animation entitled How the Human Cell Atlas is Helping to Combat COVID-19. I'm just going to show a little video.
By using the Human Cell Atlas, we can see which cells are most likely to be used by the virus. Not all cells have the right parts, called receptors, that allow the COVID-19 virus to bind to the cell, but some do, including cells in the nose, eyes, intestines, throat, and lungs, which are all vulnerable to the coronavirus and can be used to copy and spread the virus around the body.
Excuse me. So just to talk about that quickly, that was a really rapid fire response to a paper that came out by HCA researchers in April, looking at these particular cells and how the virus was interacting with them. We wanted to create an accessible, digitally focused resource to send out to schools, particularly focusing secondary school students aged between 11 and 14. I think it's worth noting that due to the lockdown, trying to get voiceover artists such as the young voice on the animation was going to prove difficult. And luckily I have a 16-year-old daughter who was kind enough to lend her voice to support the delivery of this particular asset. We launched the animation and distributed it via our partnerships across the country, and we've had over 16 views on it so far. So a real success and starting from zero. The second thing I was really interested in doing was opening a space to start thinking about our digital audience. And so what I did was start a program entitled the Art Size Salon series, which is an effort to bring together artists from across the UK and HCA researchers from across the research to start talking about the reality of COVID and how art science collaborations can start to tackle some of the challenges collaboratively and together. We used WebEx as a platform for the first project. back in July. We had a good audience of about 50 people, many of whom signed up to our mailing list, and that's something solid for us to build on. So really quickly, in terms of where we're at now for Human Cell Atlas, in terms of reimagining a public engagement program that had been devised primarily as a live face-to-face program of delivery, thinking about reframing digital activity as core to delivery is something that I'm really thinking through right now. Establishing a digital infrastructure for activity as our primary audience may be online for the foreseeable future. Accepting that and seeing that as an opportunity, I think, is an important approach. Be opportunistic, so capitalize on those activities that resonate with the current moment and can meet your goals, even if they're unexpected. Future-proof your public engagement by integrating COVID mitigation into your briefs and tenders for future activities. So if you're commissioning new work, if you're bringing new people in, think about the fact that actually moving forward post-COVID, it may not be fully online, but certainly it's probably going to have some level of restriction over the next 12 months at least. Reimagine those physical outcomes as a mixed reality experience, with social distancing measures probably being needed to be put in place, and or digital rather than just a purely physical experience. And use that slippage time to R&D for new public engagement formats and tools, and think about the impact that you can have with them. And then the final project that I wanted to talk about was a series of online discussions, much like this one, that I had been collaborating with an organization in the Northwest with, entitled Future Everything. Art Act Practice, Critical Intersections of Art, Innovation and the Maker Movement is a book that was released in November 2019. Myself and my colleague Victoria Bradbury worked with over 26 different contributors over 5 different continents to explore critical and interdisciplinary modes of practice that combine arts, technology and making. Back when live events actually were a reality, we started delivering a series of launch events to bring together collaborators from the book to talk about their practice to live audiences. However, during the COVID pandemic, we utilized the opportunity of the community that we had already brought together through the book to start thinking about how on a global level our community is faring, and how they're dealing with the particular challenges that the pandemic had afforded them within their own global contexts. So the first event happened in May and focused on where do we work. Many chapters and case studies in the book present collaborative and co-working contexts, which are at this moment impossible to work in. And the first session considered how we can, given our current limitations and resources that we have access to now, how are we actually working? And what might the notion of, how might the notion of co-working shift during the time of the pandemic? The second session brought a diverse range of different people to the second discussion, which looked at home in the network, which explored net-based artistic practices, meaningful engagement, and new strategies for online experiences. And as we began to feel more familiar with online and network spaces, we considered the existing knowledge of net-based artistic practices and how they could provide insight during pandemic and post-pandemic times. And the final event looked at then and then. So it explored the implication of the COVID-19 pandemic in society and culture. And as the world showed the first signs of emerging towards a slow and long recovery from the pandemic, we examined art, making and curatorial practices that reflected on the pandemic and post-pandemic times, and considered what the implications of this outbreak might be for our practices. So in terms of a response to the pandemic, using the context of my research, I think it's important to think about collaboration with partners to maximize to maximize our content, but also recognize that it's becoming an increasingly saturated space online to try and access audiences. I think you should think global, exactly like this, this discussion, and capitalize on the lack of geographic boundaries and really make the most of that. I think the situation is increasingly fluid and dynamic, so we need to be agile in these spaces in order to make an effective response to them. I think it's good to play with formats. We're all on a learning curve. We're all at an early trajectory in terms of figuring out how to make the most of this situation and sustain and survive. I think ensuring that audience interaction and participation in these online sessions should be a focus, and playing around with new formats like Slido, live polls, chats, Q&As, give it a go and see how it goes. I think by evaluating your audience behaviors and feedback and iterating your formats and projects, you'll find that your audiences, particularly those that are existing to you, are sensitive to your situation, and they will be generous to your experimentations. I also think that we should keep talking. I think creating a spaces such as these for connection, reflection, and learning is vital as we move through this crisis and start co-creating a post-pandemic reality for our sector. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Susie. That was fantastic, really interesting, and the power of collaboration, I think, came across really, really strongly. I don't know if we have Matthew still to join us. Is he rejoined, or should we just go to questions for Susie? Inga, do we know if Matthew has rejoined us?
Hi, Jennifer, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, over to you then, Matthew.
Okay, I will attempt to share my screen once again. So can you see that, guys?
Not yet.
Can you see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Super. Sorry about earlier. I think my connection dropped out, so hopefully this will work this time. So yeah, I was telling you really about the situation of Northumberland. It's a very rural place. Cheeseburn is situated in a kind of very rural location, a private house and a farm. So it's a very unusual situation for a contemporary art destination. But actually, Northumberland has some really interesting visual arts settings, which have, many of them have been around for over 20 years. Cheeseburn is quite a new venture. We started it in 2014 when I just left the Arts Council, and I was introduced to Joanna Riddell, who owns this amazing house and gardens, and had actually spent 30 years reclaiming the gardens and rebuilding the house. And she was passionate about sculpture, and I'd spent 20 years commissioning sculpture and commissioning public art projects. So I knew a lot of the artists. And in a way, it's quite an unusual venture because we don't really have any staff. We don't have any public income. We just started doing it to see if it would work. But we do have a really good network and good relationships with a lot of artists. So we started gathering work on loan and putting together a program, which is manifested by a number of open weekends each summer. And each year it's grown and grown. And there's something really kind of quite interesting, I think, about putting contemporary work in a very historic garden setting, in this case, an English country garden. And each year it's grown. So we're open at the moment. We reopened 2 weeks ago, and I think we've been having about 1,000 people each weekend. In terms of the impact of COVID, it meant that we lost the first part of the summer. We were unable to open for our May and July weekends, but we did like many people, I guess, we did a risk assessment. We decided we couldn't do a few things. We couldn't do our indoor gallery. We couldn't do our indoor spaces like the chapel where we often put on music, but we could maybe limit visitor numbers and present an outdoor program. And I have to say, over the last 2 weeks, we've had such great feedback from audiences who really have been just delighted to get out and see something and be out and about again, connecting with each other. So the program is very much, I would say 80% of the program is presenting work by artists in the region, often people that I've worked with before. Sometimes they were able to do bigger things. This is an artist from China who in 2016, I curated a show by him at the Today Art Museum in Beijing. And then amazingly, he was able to fund his work to come over to the Northeast, which was something that was way beyond our budget, but it was something that he was able to do. So as Cheeseburn's grown, it's become, I suppose, a more UK-wide program and sometimes an international program. But the thing we've had, I guess, the strongest feedback about is the thing we do every year, where I mentor around 10 young artists, graduates from our regional universities. And it's a simple process, really. We fund each one of the artists to make a proposal, we mentor them, we kind of explain how a commissioning process works, because they're all very new, very young, recent graduates. And then each May we have an exhibition where their proposals are presented, and actually our audience get to vote on their favorites. And then each one of the proposals each year is then funded to be realized, and the artist gets their first ever budget to play with and their first ever commission. So this was the winner of our first competition about 5 years ago, who proposed this project for about 2,000 ceramic squirrels, which were installed in the walled gardens. And this got a lot of media attention, and that kind of led to a lot more visitors, and I guess was one of those step changes in an organization getting to a bigger audience through greater media exposure. This was last year's winner, an artist who made a huge installation of recycled plastic, including a dance performance. And this is something that we're learning from, really. I should say again that there is no real staff. There's me as the curator, and there's Joanna, who's the owner of the historic house. And really, we just look each other in the eye and decide if we can do it or not, and if it will work. So unlike a lot of the other projects I do, which are permanent commissions with new buildings, which involve lots of permissions and working with authorities, this is a very simple process where we just try things out and hopefully offer Cheeseburn up as a place where artists can experiment and try new things. And one of the things we've realized is actual performance is becoming a bigger part of our program. So we've done a lot of sound this year and increasing amount of performance along with the sculpture. And this is the winner this year. And I suppose it's a little example of how we have to do things differently with COVID. So this artist proposal was for around 30 of these cube paintings to be sited around the grounds at Cheeseburn, and the public would get to move them around and push them around and create new formations with them. But obviously with COVID, we can't have people touching things, so we've done it instead as a performance on the tennis court, which has a fence around it. So basically the audience surround the area and watch a performance rather than interacting with it. So really in reopening, we've had lots of small changes like that. There's probably, I think I've got 75 works this year at Cheeseburn, and there's only 5 or 6 we couldn't do because they involved physical interaction, and we need to keep the public at a safe distance. But actually, as I was saying before, the performance elements are really something that we've had great feedback on, and the opportunity to see a live performer in a historic setting connecting with a contemporary piece of work is quite I don't know, it's got quite a sort of magic quality to it sometimes, and we're very lucky that the gardens are it's a gorgeous sort of English country garden anyway, but there's something that happens when you put a contemporary object, if you can site it well in a historic place. There's a real I guess a great frisson and a great reaction. I thought I'd show you this project, thinking about digital and thinking about new technology. The image on the left is a scanned chandelier from Venice, which the artist secretly scanned from a museum there and then 3D printed full size, and was one of our most famous, one of our most popular pieces last year. But the piece on the right, The Lady in Green, is I suppose quite a poignant piece. This is actually a 3D scan and a 3D print full size of the artist's mother. And the artist, you know, while we were all locked down, was unable to see her mother, but she did have a 3D scan of her. So then she actually managed to print her mother full size during the time when she was unable to see her. And when we opened a couple of weeks ago, luckily her mother was able to come out and see it. And that was a big hit, actually, to see the original next to the print. So as I say, we reopened a couple of weeks ago. We had planned to be shut all year, but like a lot of heritage properties and a lot of outdoor properties, we're lucky compared to, I guess, compared to theatres and music venues, in that we can repurpose our offer. So there has been some impacts. You know, we've lost a lot of our summer earnings, and we are, as I said, we are we're consciously an unfunded organisation. We're just trying to earn our income through donations, through tickets, through sales of food and drink, and through sales of artwork. And that's worked really well for us in the last 7 years, and it's put us in a strong position. But we lost a lot of that because we've had to reduce our opening times. We haven't been able to do things like the cafe. All the work we've done with young artists has been difficult because the universities have been closed, and we haven't been able to open our gallery or any of our indoor spaces. And I suppose the biggest thing is about the uncertainty of planning programs. We heard from Susie and from the book festival. You know, it's very hard to plan programs which are going to cost you quite a lot of money if you risk them being cancelled at the last minute because of a local lockdown. A few positive things have happened as well. We've moved to an online booking system, which has worked fine and has actually given us a lot more security, knowing who's coming. We were able to work out a one-way route, which I know a lot of museums are now working out, so that you can only go around a museum in one way, but we have a one-way route around the gardens. We did limit our number of visitors in the first weekend, but we felt it was safe. The feedback from audience members said they felt safe. So we put our visitor numbers up a bit. We're not back to 100%, but I think last weekend we had nearly 1,000 visitors, which is quite good for us. We're also quite aware that there are very few national or international tourists in Northumberland this summer. And so we're thinking much more about reconnecting with local audiences. We think that people will be only traveling maybe 10 or 15 miles to go somewhere. They won't be doing long journeys. And talking to tourism colleagues, we think that's going to be the case for at least the next year. So the idea of international visitors is going to be greatly reduced. Our airport was shut for quite a while in Newcastle, and that now has a much reduced number of flights. So we're going to be a much more sealed in region in a way, with local visitors touring around the local area rather than people passing through on their way to Scotland. We've also realised we've had to pay for additional staff, so our costs have gone up, which is another, I guess, big issue, especially for bigger venues. I have to say, though, the feedback from visitors has been absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of people who've been locked down all summer are really just delighted to be out, delighted to see their friends and colleagues again. I think we've built quite a loyal audience over the last 7 years, and it's, you know, it's been great for us to see them again. And I think we've got to think about ways of retaining them, making them feel safe, but finding a way to, I guess, carry on in a slightly reduced way, because I think our feeling is this will be going on for at least another year if we're lucky. And I suppose the summary of that is this model sustainable? I think it is. It's okay for us. I think it's much harder for a building-based venue that's got a lot of overheads. Lastly, I'll just leave you with a sort of different image. Cheeseburne's something I do kind of half a day a week. I also work 2 days a week for something called the North East Culture Partnership, which brings together the region's 12 local authorities and 5 universities and lots of cultural organisations. And we were actually the first organisation in the country to write a regional recovery plan for culture. So it's there if you want to read it. We are trying to refresh it at the moment. It's now a couple of months old. But I think that the stark thing for us is that we can see, talking to our colleagues, that museums, galleries, heritage properties like Cheeseburn are reopening. The much more uncertain thing is for festivals next summer, and particularly for music and theatre, because what they do is the opposite of social distancing. Fundamentally, those venues pull people together and entertain them and give them a great night out. So our research at the moment is that actually for a lot of the funded organisations, arts councils funding has supported them through. Few of the theatres are talking about closing before, actually going out of business before Christmas. But I think if they can't open next Easter, I think we are going to see some buildings in a situation where they can't reopen at all. It's a different outlook, as I say, for the museums and galleries who are reopening now. Most of them are reopening in the region in a limited way. But I think there's a twin track now over the next 6 or 9 months where the performing arts have a real struggle on their hands, and the other cultural venues, are going to have to find new ways of redesigning their spaces and re-engaging with their audiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That was terrific. And thank you very much for switching places, Susie and Matthew. That was much appreciated. And I think from all three speakers, you've heard that there's been much adapting going on, some of it in place more than in other places, but there's a lot of adapting going on, a lot of turning, and all that in an atmosphere of huge uncertainty, and also at a time of huge appreciation of the cultural offers. And in the summer in the UK, that's okay, being outdoors. But when winter comes, we know that it won't be very much fun being outside. So there will be other challenges from that point of view. Inna, I don't know how much more time we have left, but I hope we have time for questions for Susie and Matthew, maybe together.
У нас есть один...
We do have one question to Susie about the projects that have to do with science and medicine. Do you have permanent staff on the projects, or you hire on a project basis experts from outside?
So the research Human Cell Atlas, so the Human Cell Atlas project brings together permanent research staff from a range of different higher education institutions and universities. So within the UK, that's Oxford University, Cambridge, Newcastle, and the Sanger Institute, all of which will have permanent staff delivering research around the themes and topics identified within the strengths of their fields in their universities. So these are full-time permanent research staff delivering on the Human Cell Atlas Collaborative Project.
И второй вопрос, как удается так оперативно...
And the second question is, how do you manage to re-adapt?
Да-да-да. Второй вопрос.
The second question, I will repeat this, is how do you manage to be so quick in turning your project around? I mean, in projects that have to do with COVID as well, when we don't have a lot of sure, precise scientific information, how are you not afraid of maybe broadcasting information that is not 100% correct?
That's a great question. That's a great question. In terms of the research that's coming out around COVID, I leave that to the scientists, essentially in the first instance. All of the scripting, all of the creative side is ran through the scientists for checkoff. So all of the information that goes out, I can feel confident that it has gone through due process from the scientific perspective to make sure that we're not sending anything out that's not aligning with scientific thought and process. There's quite robust processes in place in terms of sign off for anything that we send out.
And I think in more general terms, we can probably say that the situation here in the UK is so volatile. It changes all the time. So everybody's got to be rather cautious about what they can offer and be ready to change the offer or well, you've heard the word cancel and postpone several times from our speakers. So we know that that's the situation. We know we have to be really careful and be ready to act as quickly as possible. So were there any other questions for our speakers?
Есть еще небольшой вопрос.
There is one more question that has to do with Matthew's presentation about what are the conditions of the artist giving their works on loan to your institution. So it's a permanent loan, I suppose.
No, it's a temporary loan, probably for 1 to 2 years, and they tend to all be artists that I have a relationship with, and I've previously commissioned them somewhere else. So we do take a commission on sales. We take 20% commission if we sell a piece, and we have a sort of flexible approach if we get commissions for artists. So yeah, I mean, we're very lucky that we have a lot of artists that will loan work to us, but also we present Cheeseburn as a place where they can realize new projects. So what tends to happen is, if I've previously commissioned an artist somewhere else, I then invite them to lend some work to Cheeseburn. And then once they start to see the different spaces in the gardens and the different buildings we have, they often come back with a plan for a new installation or a new project. And often we've had support from, or the artist has gained support from people like the Arts Council or the local authority sometimes to realise other projects. So it's quite a fluid relationship, but it seems to work.
Thank you for that, Matthew. I think, is there anything else we should do? Or?
Да, если позволите, вот
if I may, we had several questions that our participants sent when they registered to this event, and there were a lot of questions that have to do with partnerships, new types of interaction inside the non-profits. I mean, the new types of partnerships that emerged during the pandemic. And during our conversation, the word partnerships keeps reoccurring and coming back. It's one of the key notions, but still I want to clarify, could you tell us, are there any new forms of interaction in the cultural field between organization and active practitioners? Are there, and if there are, what are they?
Susie or Matthew, do you want to come, or any of you want to come back on that?
Just with through my work with the Northeast Culture Partnership, we've been aware that a number of galleries and sort of arts agencies have been, I suppose, demonstrating their social value quite a bit through the really difficult lockdown period, where there's the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art down in the south of the region that's been doing sort of creative art boxes delivered to young families' homes. And I know Gem Arts, which is an Asian arts sort of music and festival agency, which has been doing something similar in Gateshead. And both of them have reported to us that, one of the very difficult things is often people with low incomes have very poor digital access and, can't actually participate in some of the digital products that our cultural venues are putting online. So, you know, quite simple things like, you know, activity boxes for kids who are off school, creative projects which they can do at home with their parents have been really great. And I think while our venues are closed, they need to demonstrate their social value like that.
I would agree, and that was very much the motivation from the Little Inventors perspective, was to start to kind of really think through how we can kind of maximize the infrastructure that had already been established. We already had a website that we facilitated free downloadable resources for teachers and parents to access, but really thinking through how to develop that into a much more robust offer. That could really kind of, you know, develop our program in positive ways, was something that we spent time on, and luckily we had existing funding to be able to kind of move into that space, but also won some further funding. Outside of kind of getting funding from that, I think, you know, for me, being able to work in collaboration with partners who had an existing audience base, like Future Everything in Manchester, to kind of catalyse my community and bring global perspectives around the table and create a platform for dialogue, was really positive, and kind of allowed us to be quite fleet of foot. So I think kind of identifying what you can bring to the table and what partners can bring to the table and matching those two things is a positive conversation to have. And that is about reaching out to colleagues and peers and partners more broadly to see how that can happen.
Thank you, Susie. And Susie Troop, if you're still with us, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I absolutely agree with what Susie just said, actually. I think that has to be one of the positives, that we are all more connected as a northern region. So with our partners in other parts of the north, so Manchester, Leeds, these places, the other writing agencies and organisations and festivals, we've all become much more connected. So I think that is really a way forward. So I think that's a positive thing to take from it. And also perhaps thinking on a more ecological scale, I think we've all realised that we can have meetings without actually getting on a train or getting on a bus or driving somewhere. So I think that's really good. I mean, we every year go down to London and spend a frantic 2 days meeting publishers. Well, this year we are going to do that on an online forum. So I think that's a positive and different way forward maybe that we've taken from this.
Great, thank you for that, Susie.
I think a final thing that I would like to say is to kind of think about, you know, the fact that actually this whole process over the last 6 months has really, I think, opened up a much more mainstream audience to the potential of online experiences. And while I do agree that people are chomping at the bit to get back to live face-to-face interactions, certainly as an extrovert, I am one of those people. But I also think that we should, as cultural producers and programmers, you know, think about what it means to kind of have a much more interested audience in engaging with online experiences and content, and how we can experiment and play with that in creative ways. I mean, certainly that's where my head is at.
Thank you, Susie. So I think really to just try and sum up a bit, I think out of all the uncertainty, and as I say, we've heard the words cancellation and postponement used an awful lot, out of all this uncertainty, I think we can at least say for sure that there is perhaps a renewed interest in cultural offers. I think people are really seeking out what culture can offer us in a time of uncertainty, in a time of anxiety. So there's a wonderful opportunity there. And obviously the digital rises or allows people to rise to meet that. But there's also, of course, a danger of digital overload. We get a bit tired of Zoom. We get a bit tired of being online and looking at screens. So there's always, I suppose, a balance that we would try to seek there with those, between the opportunities and the challenges, I guess. And I think, you know, still we have in the UK such a volatile situation that really, you know, next week we might be facing even greater closures than we already have. We just don't know. We just don't know.
Дженнифер, спасибо большое за
Oh, thank you,
такой
Jennifer, for this short summary. But I guess we're not through yet. We are asking our participants if they have any questions of their own. Inna, you have a question from the preliminary list of questions. Yes, we have one question
который связан с тем,
that has
как
to do with how our colleagues, speakers, and experts and moderators see the priority trends in social and cultural integration of museums in rural areas. How we get local people interested in investing in culture when the resources are scarce, well, and not growing. So you can start thinking. I understand it's a separate discussion of its own, but some experts did mention, approaching rural audiences. Maybe I'll clarify a bit, adding to make it less abstract. Otherwise, it's too broad. I think there's one more topic, and the lesson we've learned from our previous training is how our colleagues know how to work with volunteers, which is one of the basic things for sustainability of a cultural organization. We're talking about very well-educated, refined people who are really involved intellectually and as experts. Maybe we could look at the way museums in rural areas can meet their audience in this perspective, because volunteers are an answer to the challenge of making people more interested. I will allow myself a more complex question, maybe two questions in one, but you could answer it if you want to, and you could try and answer it.
Can I say something about that? One of the things with we did an audience survey in terms of attitudes and how safe people were feeling for the Northeast Culture Partnership, and it was very clear that there's a perception that the countryside is safe and the city is less safe. And when a lot of the rural museums, we have Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, which is the Roman wall, which has, I think, about 7 or 8 museums along it. When that reopened a few weeks ago, they had very good uptake in terms of visitors wanting to come out and come out to the countryside and be outside. And obviously that only really works in the summer. But the rural has a bit of a advantage at the moment, in the perception is that it's a safer place to go than possibly an indoor city centre base. I also just want to say something about volunteers. With our experience at Cheeseburn is that we do like to give people the opportunity to work with us and work with us through the summer, but we do have to pay people. We don't support, particularly for the graduates and young students that work with us. We use something called the living wage, which is a calculator in the UK, where there are a number of payment bands depending on how old you are, and so we don't pay people a lot, but we pay people according to the living wage. And I think a few of sort of funded cultural organisations in the UK have had quite a lot of criticism for using a lot of volunteers without payment, and so that's a kind of delicate balance, I think.
Thanks for that, Matthew. And I think that's a really good point, that at the moment, rural areas do have an advantage over metropolitan areas. And maybe that's a very good time to be looking to build audiences and to build, to increase reach. And I suppose not particular to the COVID situation, but one of the ways of doing that seems to be becoming more and more accepted is you start in the UK anyway from the bottom up, and you start from your community and you build your community, your individual and your community stories. And that's the way you get local communities to be interested in museums. I don't know if either of the Susies wanted to add anything to that. Susie O'Hara, were you? Susie, sorry, Susie Troop, you were?
Yes, sorry, Susie. Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's really interesting, Matthew. I agree with that. And I think one of the things that we are going to pilot in the autumn is actually taking events live streamed, well, an event live streamed into village halls, because in Northumberland, we have a lot of very active village halls, which are a good size. With distancing, you could probably seat 50 people in them. And we recognize a lot of our audiences not only don't want to travel because of the risk to health, but also perhaps are unable to travel. So actually it's giving us an opportunity to reach people who don't have transport and are limited to their rural small village. So I think that's an interesting sidestep from that. So we will hold a pilot event in, for example, the Abbey, and then we will screen it into a few village halls. Now, the issue with the volunteers is very interesting because we have a very good team of volunteers who want to volunteer their time because they get to see the events for free, but they're all perforce older. And of course, next year we will face challenges in that direction because older people are the ones that are feeling vulnerable in this situation. We don't have much luck given the time of year in recruiting young people because they're all facing exam timetables in April, May. So that's going to be an interesting challenge for us.
Thank you for that, Susie. Are there any other questions in there? I think there might be some more.
Да, есть один вопрос.
Yes, there's a question to Susie.
Содержательного характера. Коллеги спрашивают,
The colleagues are asking what values can a local event be assigned to be competitive? How do you compete with the leaders in the industry who are also very active? They have more resources to produce quality content. How do you become competitive? Is there a chance for smaller local events, niche events that have to do with some certain topics like a literary festival? Do they have a chance to compete with the leaders in the market?
I think in our world, in the literary world, there is actually a limited amount of opportunities to hear authors talk, and it's very hard to access those authors unless you are a literary organization. So in that way, we have an access to authors who want to sell their work, talk about their work, sell their books. And that's something that we have found is very popular precisely because it's not very common in Northumberland. So I would say we don't face massive competition like that. And there's a lot of appetite to hear authors speak.
Спасибо, Сьюзи. Мне кажется,
Thank you, Susie. I think that the answer is obvious. If you're working for a certain niche market, you understand what your audience wants. You will always be in demand in this market. The question is how you position yourself. And it doesn't matter what large museums or big festivals do. You will have your audience if you know who your audience is and if you feel your audience and know what they want. We don't have any more written questions so far from the participants. Do you have any more questions? Because I do have a couple. Well, go ahead with your questions because there were many questions, but we somehow touched upon all the topics that people were interested in. How you rebuilt your activities, how you reformatted your activities, how they work in a team, how they distribute workload, partnership issues. We've touched upon this. We could use your questions as well. My question is, Jennifer, do you allow me? Nothing on your waiting list?
No, of course.
Мне все время на протяжении вот этой пандемии
During this pandemic, I found it interesting to watch how the content of cultural institutions' activity changes in these limited conditions. Today, Susie has mentioned it, Susie O'Hara mentioned it, how they managed to change so quickly, especially the organizations that are more flexible in terms of operating digital technology. They were able to switch to different channels of communication with their audiences. But my question is rather whether the content that you broadcast to your audience has changed. When you're talking about working with new audiences, this is something Susie has mentioned, does it mean that you have to transform your content in this or that way? Or are you only meaning new formats when you're talking about? What about the content? How does the content change in these new circumstances, within this digital activity?
I mean, I think, yes, I think your content does go through a process maybe of reconception and reframing because of what you're trying to deal with. So, and I guess what the content relates to your focus and your goal. So, if you're trying to shift what primarily was supposed to be a physical experience into an online space, you have to reconceive what that experience will be. And therefore that will impact the kind of content that you produce based on whatever format you decide to distribute it through. So if it's about, creating an experience, the content will go through that kind of conceptual transformation, I suppose, to make the most as a curator, and a programmer in the same way that Matthew and Susie are. What you're always trying to do is ensure that the work is presented to the best of your ability for an experience by the audience that will be as compelling as possible and resonate when they walk away. And so that is always your kind of core focus when you're thinking about developing content. And so the other aspect of it is then responding to the context and being talking about the elephant in the room, I guess. So generally people are going to be online because they've either been stuck at home or, they can't go outside, or they don't feel safe to go to a public physical space. So I think it's also, for me, I was very interested in what that looked like and meant for people in terms of creative practice, in terms of artistic practice, curatorial practice. And so I kind of facilitated a series of discussions, using the kind of content that I'd previously been engaging with via the format of a published book, and kind of imagined the possibilities of what that book could catalyze by way of content that would be meaningful for, I suppose, a more peer-led audience. So other fellow creatives in my space working with the same kinds of challenges that I was facing too. And so I think it's about your motivation, it's about your goal, and it's about what you're looking to provide for your audience. And that all absolutely impacts the content, how it's shaped, the media format that you would use, and the ways in which then you reach out to that audience. So all of those things I think are important to think about.
Спасибо большое, Сьюзи.
Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions? I mean Matthew or Susie Troop or Jennifer, anything you'd like to say?
I think one of the things we saw at the start of the lockdown, so I don't know how long the lockdown lasted in the UK, but probably, let's say, 3 months. There is, if you look at the funded cultural organisations in the Northeast, there's probably around 50 that get core government funding through the Arts Council, and ranging from theatres to museums, and music venues in the Northeast. And it was quite interesting at the beginning how some organizations moved very swiftly to digital engagement and others really went quiet. And I think that was a real mistake to go quiet. And, you know, it was a time obviously where, you know, anecdotally, we understand that people consumed more culture than ever while they were locked down because they were at home, they were listening to music they hadn't heard for ages, they were watching more stuff online. And that was a great opportunity to cement the bond with your audience. And I mean, we just did a little thing at Cheeseburn where we actually went back to a previous project, which we'd done with the sound artist Chris Watson and the poet Linda France. And we sort of broadcast that out in about 4 chapters. And it was a kind of sound and poet piece about the dawn chorus with the birds singing at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning at, you know, at Cheeseburn, which was a lovely kind of audio experience. And it was a previous project we had. We wouldn't have done it because I suppose before this all happened, we purely thought of things like Facebook as a way of driving people to physically attend Cheeseburn. We'd never really thought of it as a channel to deliver content and artwork through. So, you know, for a little organization like that, you know, that was a kind of steep learning curve, I think.
I suppose too, we should add that there are some arts organizations, maybe decreasing numbers now, maybe not so many, but some who feel they don't have the skills to engage fully with the digital world. And so some probably feel at this stage they have lost opportunities and probably wish they did have those skills and that they better quickly acquire them because I think it has really changed the playing field. I think digital is now to the fore in a way that you ignore at your peril if you're a cultural organization.
Yes, and I would urge people to start where they are. You know, I mean, I think as Matthew suggests, you know, you don't have to be a technical wizard to think about Facebook and other social media channels as an opportunity to showcase what you do. You know, I think, you know, a few kind of quality control measures, as I discussed earlier, in terms of trying to make sure that whatever you put out is consistent with your offer more generally, you know, and just thinking through and recognizing that everybody is at an early stage in this process, you know. And I do think, you know, my experience has been is that audiences are generous, you know, they are interested in how you creatively respond to this current situation through whatever means that is at your disposal. So I would encourage people to be playful and to be experimental, because it's only by doing that and being transparent in your process that you can develop an expertise and find what's meaningful in terms of these technologies for you and your organization.
And that's a lovely positive response. Olga, do you have any?
Спасибо, Сьюзи, это даже звучит как прекрасное завершающее.
It does sound as a great way to finalize our discussion, but we do have one more question from Maria. Will tell what it is. The question. Well, I did have a question myself because looking at what's going on in theaters, regardless of the lockdown, many theaters went online and started writing Zoom plays and producing them. And theaters tried to adapt various ways of collecting donations or selling tickets for online shows. And when at some point they could go out into public spaces in the cities, on the promenades, or I mean, quests and other formats were actually quite efficient with all the limitations and with all the distancing between the spectators that there is. So are there any any examples of theaters adapting in this way that our experts would be familiar with or no?
there's a very interesting example from the State Theatre of South Australia, who've done a really interesting and innovative program where they commissioned 10 playwrights to produce 10 short plays, 10 monologues over 10 weeks. So each writer rather, produced one play per week. And this has been broadcast, and it's really helped their audience reach. It's helped profile the writers and the actors during this period when they might otherwise not have been in the public eye. But there's no revenue stream from that. So not very many theatres have managed to do innovative things, which has brought in some money, because some people have charged, but usually only a very small amount. So it still leaves an enormous funding gap, even though some wonderful innovative things are happening.
Маш, ты ждешь еще ответ на свой вопрос? Кто-то... Все, да? То есть, ну, мы можем сказать, что у нас практически закончились.
We are out of urgent questions. We would be happy to keep talking. And of course, our colleagues have an extremely interesting experience as practitioners and experts. But I think that we should finalize this discussion by saying that we will keep in touch. There will be new projects, and I'm starting to think that for sure some organizations would like to join the Susie O'Hara's project for Little Inventors. Maybe our colleagues who are interested in literature could probably be interested or in working together with the Susie troupe. And I would really like to think about opportunities for Russian artists, maybe displaying their work in the sculpture garden. So we do see a lot of intersections, and we move in similar directions, and we now with this discussion we do enrich each other's understanding. And to conclude the panel, I would say that and I invite the colleagues to comment on what I'm about to say is, well, I think that despite the fact that the pandemic became an extremely important challenge for all of us, and it generated many negative and crisis effects for specific individual organizations and practitioners in the cultural industries who lost their jobs or had to lose a lot of income. Regardless of that, the industry itself has gained a very important insight and positive one from this situation, because we suddenly realized that we do have new opportunities that we maybe ignored earlier, that we didn't have the time or didn't have the courage to look at. Meaning, I mean, our forced entry into new ways of communication with our audiences generated an opportunity to reach audiences that we have never reached before. And I see that the content that has been emerging over the last 6 months, it's much more democratic. And we have been reprimanded so many times for being in this ivory tower, that the language of cultural institutions is too complex. It's inaccessible for wider audiences. And now I think that everyone became a bit more accessible and easygoing. I mean, people are now trying to to talk to their audiences in an ordinary language, the language of the challenges we're facing on an everyday basis. And it turned out that we benefit greatly from that as well. We do have an influx of new ideas, valuable feedback, and the sense of community. And I think that we should be really careful in not losing this resource and to keep using it even when we will be able to go back to the normal offline life.
Absolutely. Простите за этот длинный speech.
Well, I'm sorry for this lengthy monologue.
Коллеги Джуди, Matthew.
Susie, Matthew, Susie, do you want to add anything to that and to conclude?
I think just to say thank you for the opportunity. It's been invaluable, really, and just so great to see so many people from across the other side, if you like. Well, what other side? I don't know. To the east of us. And thank you so much, and I hope we can all keep connecting at some point. And thank you for the opportunity, Jennifer.
I would echo what Susie says. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to spend some time with you, our Russian colleagues in the cultural sector, and I wish you luck in creatively responding with innovative solutions to the challenges that you face within your organizations and within your programs. But it's been a fantastic discussion from my side, and thank you again, Jennifer, Olga, Ina, and Elena. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fascinating. Also, hearing from colleagues that are nearby, but hearing the perspective from you guys in Russia. And it'd be really interesting actually to see some of the things that you guys do and to maybe see your, I don't know, your websites or your social media or some of the things that are going on in Russia. I'm sure there's a lot of innovation there that we can learn from in the Northeast as well. Thank you.
And I think we should thank our wonderful translators. A brilliant job.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. But thank you to Olga, thank you to Inna, thank you to Masha, thank you to Elena for making this possible. It was, I think we all agree, it was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Уважаемые коллеги, спасибо большое.
Dear colleagues, Yelena Konovalova also wants to add a couple of words of thanks. Traditionally, she joins in saying thank you to our experts, to our panelists, to the audience who came to saw us, and we will send the final survey to every participant of this talk, because we want to find out what was your experience of the last several months of working with us together, and how we should make our program and our educational practices evolve. And we want to keep exchanging experiences between the regions of Russia and between various countries in the world. So to conclude this cycle, I will say that Olga said, she mentioned our internship, and that at the beginning we thought that we didn't know what could we borrow from the UK experience, since our life looks completely different. But by the end of the internship, we understood that many practices are relevant to us as well, and there are practices which we could contribute to our British colleagues. Today's meeting shows again that we have a lot in common, specifically when we have a common challenge. Everything mentioned by our speakers today has to do with the meetings and with the talks that we had over this summer. We spoke about working with young audiences, and today we saw an example of that. We have been talking about the new role of cultural institutions, and that is something that was touched upon today as well, about changing one's activities and using digital technologies as a cultural institution. And it shows once again that despite the distances, we're all joined by common aspirations and the desire to produce something of value for others. So I do thank the participants, and I do hope that one day we will meet in person and that we might bring in an element of direct physical or direct human interaction, physical exchange of energy. And this is something that we're all lacking as of lately. And you, Matthew, you can meet a part of our audience, Zoom audiences. You can have a look at our cases collection. We had it translated in English. You can access our website, its English version, and you can have an idea of who was with us today. And well, thank you. Thank all of you, and hope to see you again soon. Again, colleagues, I wish all of you nice, warm summer days to stay or to be playful, not being afraid of using new formats and enter new partnerships and not being afraid to try new things. So colleagues, I wish a good day to all of you. And once again, I remind the participants that please do send us the surveys that you have received. And well, we thank our colleagues from Northumberland and the Newcastle. So I think we have reached the end of the event and we are saying goodbye.